Hey there, Hetty here. Eons ago, sometime last year, I made passing reference to something I do when casting a circle, and one of you guys commented that my approach sounded a little different and that I should expand upon it in a video. And so today, I'm going to do exactly that. Before beginning, any of you who happen to have hit on this video via search for how to cast a circle, this will be more personal rumination and overview of how my own thinking and approach has evolved than beginner how-to, and that although my own use of circles found its genesis in primarily Wiccan and Wicca spin-off, but we're going to deny it to our dying breath, occult books, my approach to circle casting and my reasons for doing so probably deviate fairly substantially from Wiccan best practices. So if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to find it here. Still, if you've got a few minutes time and any interest in exploring variations on the theme, you're welcome to stick around. So now, circles. Let's skate right by all those questions about necessity and safety and such. Spoiler, the answer to those questions is it depends. The answer is always it depends. And begin instead by focusing on the obvious consideration, 3+ dimensional geometry. Because it goes without saying, but watch me do so anyway, a ritual circle usually isn't a circle. It's a something else. And what that something else is depends on what you're reading, or did read, and what your instincts tell you, and perhaps even whether and how you've asked yourself the question of what a circle is supposed to be, and how that might inform its structure. It's been a long while since I've read a chapter on the topic of casting circles, so I don't know how similarly it's treated these days, but back then, Wicca was basically the heart of 95% of descriptions of ritual circles that appeared in the best-selling how-to guides, regardless of the label that appeared on the cover. And so the common blurb, as I recall it, was that the circle was in fact a cone of power that rose to a point above the practitioners within the circle, funneling their energies into a rising spiral toward a single point that would shoot that power upward and out, or something to that effect. Now, you can safely assume that anything I say about this sort of circle is entirely personal opinion because I'm utterly unqualified to speak about it any other way. In part, this is because pretty much the first thing I did upon reading all these chapters about the cone was decide that it was super weird that they went with a cone over a sphere, and so immediately opted to ignore that part of all of my books and base my ritual circles instead on the most common geometric conformation in the universe for encapsulating pretty much anything. Which isn't to say that the cone's a bad idea or inferior, although I do maintain it's an odd choice. That is, if you're approaching the concept of circles the way I did back then, and the way I do now, frankly. It's not odd, I eventually realized, if you think about it in the context of the group practice of the OG Wiccan coven upon which my guides to solitary practice were based, though. If you're looking for something that's supposed to act as a funnel for a large number of people's energies, people whose power is supposed to grow more concentrated until it's released and functions as one, well then a funnel actually does sound like a solid decision. And so, my historical bemusement over the cone of power began as a misunderstanding about the cone caster's priorities and assumptions, because my own were very different. I'd be working alone 99% of the time, hadn't become attached to the cone via prior coven experience, and the ubiquity of the sphere from the microcosm to the macrocosm struck me as more meaningful than whatever advantage a cone might offer in terms of its ability to concentrate and tight beam my spells to the heavens. When I found my way back to witchcraft as an adult years later, I took up the casting of circles, and a lot of the common basics besides, out of adherence to habit more than anything else. And although the process of casting circles was an easy means of getting into the zone, the same issues I'd always had with them resurfaced. Over the years, my circle and the way I think about its structure and meaning has continued to evolve, of course, becoming both a reflection of and a foundation for the approaches I employ in spellcasting and ritual. I don't know how much of what I came to do was ultimately based in my ardent refusal to think of the circle as a cone, or whether my mental insistence that it had to be a sphere was an early unconscious recognition of how I'd come to use my circles in the future. Maybe a bit of both, although the latter gives a lot more credit to teenaged me than I am typically moved to grant. Either way, the circle as I envision it now is the solution to that seemingly trivial fly in the sphere ointment that had always nagged at me, namely the issue of, where does the sphere exist with respect to my physical person and self? It might sound obvious. You cast the thing with yourself at the center, dumbass. But if that's your answer, I have some questions for you. Chief among them is, how do you use the bottom half of your sphere, the part that's underground? Does it depend on whether you're working outside or not? Do you live in an apartment and do most of your circle work there? Are your downstairs neighbors' heads temporarily admitted into the sphere when they walk to the kitchen for a snack? If your answer is basically just a variation on, well, obviously I don't consider the downstairs neighbors or the municipal sewage system to really be in circle with me, then congratulations, what you've got yourself there is a dome of power. Basically, you've built yourself a cone that can't cone. Which, in all fairness, is probably more common in witchcraft than our spheres, because I'd be willing to wager that a lot of people mentally delete the inconvenient bottom half of their circle's 3D structure for the sake of sanity. Still other solitaries employ what I think of as the mystical hamster ball of power, wherein the individual envisions themselves as standing on the inner surface of a sphere that rolls with them as they move about. And now that I think about it, it's entirely possible that I ripped the name from a Silver Ravenwolf book, because it sounds like the sort of thing I'd have read there. Maybe one of you guys will remember. In any event, my teasing questions are obviously meant in jest, not as criticism of whatever works for you, but they're a pretty accurate sampling of the sorts of thoughts that nagged me about my own circle until, over time, those problems solved themselves. Let's skip forward to what I actually do now. For me, the circle is a sphere, bisected by the ground. The bottom half of the sphere exists, but only in the mental realm, sometimes called the astral plane, but I maintain that the astral is technically something different despite how frequently the two are conflated. Having said that, I too often use astral in what I consider an incorrect manner simply because it's so common. I shouldn't, but there you go. So the mental realm, which contains the bottom half of my bisected sphere, I essentially envision as upside down, like a reflection when seen from the point of view of my physical self. Although it's right side up from the point of view of the mirror self that operates there, because there are in fact two of me spinning this thing. Here, I suppose I need to explain for those who haven't watched my videos on mental conceptualizations of self, that I play around with point of view, dissociation, and embodiment a great deal in my craft work. My starting point then is actually not to perceive myself as a single entity when I'm casting a circle. Instead, the first thing I do when preparing to begin is to perceive myself as twinned, with a mirror version of myself often embodying a slightly different constellation of traits existing on the mental plane. The process of actually casting the circle, then, is a team effort, with each of us sitting butt to butt, as if mirrored, and first reaching for one another, connecting ourselves to ourselves, then drawing our respective halves of the sphere up around us. And so, while the physical plane contains physical me, a physical altar, and physical tools, the sphere is a dome ending at the physical ground. The walls of the sphere continue seamlessly in the mental realm, however, resulting in a sphere, albeit one that hops dimensions halfway. Obviously, since the mental realm isn't restricted by the same physical and temporal laws as the material reality, the absolute size of that half of the circle is infinitely flexible in the end. Even so, I experience it as being there, experience my circle as being a fusion between two halves existing in these two realms in which I work in tandem with myself. I'll post a direct link to the astral and mental conceptualizations of self video at the end of this one, so you can watch it if you want a little more introduction and detail on the many selves approach. Why this form of circle plays so well for me is that a lot of my work involves acting in tandem in both realms, shifting my points of view and what aspects of myself are primary and in charge in the various environments in which I'm acting. And I think that a sizable proportion of you probably work in both too. Opening and closing your eyes maybe when visualizing or the like, and feeling like your consciousness is being shifted from being seated here to there, depending on which you're mentally engaged with. If there is a major departure in what I do, then it's in my tendency not to use this one-self approach by default. Instead, I've practiced and therefore become fairly adept at granting a level of permanence and independence to each iteration of myself so that it feels like I'm split between these two planes, each portion a partial reflection of the same soul, that can work independently as well as together. Notably, this split is unequal in that I experience both environments as a sort of double image, one part from the first-person point of view, the other from a third-person point of view, so that I'm both embedded within the scene and yet feel like I'm also a disembodied bystander, watching my other self interact with her environment. The places are bound together, the me's are linked, but they're also different. Both real, but neither the entirety of what we really are when all realms and aspects are one. Oh my god, so wooey. Again, go watch the conceptualizations of self videos for more info. I don't want to get bogged down in a discussion of mechanics because at its heart, this discussion isn't really about how I cast circles. It's about how I think about circles, both consciously and perhaps unconsciously, which in turn has dictated the how. So, with all this said, we come to that real question: what my approach reveals about the purpose of casting a circle in my practice, as best as I can tell, anyway. For me, circles aren't inherently about keeping anything out, although I can make them do so. Nor are they about keeping energy in, cleansing, sanctifying, or even dedicating the space to my purpose, although I can make them do that too. These features are secondary and optional additions, appended as needed to the basic structure through intent and conscious will. Instead, my circle is fundamentally a tool of union, a means of joining my principal aspects, active in waking, walking life, to those other parts of self that are always there but generally not given equal footing. It may seem strange, but in acknowledging and granting the autonomy of different aspects of self, I'm made more whole and so extend my reach. It's also a place of environmental union, binding the material and mental realms so tightly that the ordinary sense of one's primacy over the other evaporates. My experience of existence expands, collecting all those ordinarily subtle and less tangible pieces into a more accurate representation of the universe that I actually inhabit, one in which consensus reality is only a part, one in which I can discern more of the tapestry's threads and so better guide the weave. For me, this unity is the truer reflection of the world, one typified by greater insight, perception, possibility, power. I cast circles now because I can do more within them than outside of them, which is in turn because I can do more when complete, more connected, than I can when not. And my circle connects me. That is its central purpose. That's just me. What is your circle to you? I look forward to hearing some answers in the comment section, guys. Share a little, it would be grand. And until next time, you have a wonderful day.